Hi guys, welcome to this session in Microsoft Excel. In this module, I want to show you how to create pivot tables based on this data set that you're looking at now here. So all you have to do is get into your data set, make sure there's no gaps in the data, and if there is, you probably need to format it as a table or name the columns. So I'm just going to leave it as it is and then go Insert Pivot Tables, and you get the option of putting it on a new worksheet or this existing worksheet. So I'm going to go for a new worksheet and just click OK. And it just drops the pivot table grid in the new worksheet. You have the field list on the right, and it's a case of populating these boxes so that the pivot table does what you want it to do. Now this is all about management information. It's all about layout as well. My view is that the pivot table has to be easier and more simple to use than the raw data. So if you find yourself spending ages in a pivot table trying to get information, you've probably got it set up incorrect. This is how it works, and there is no right or wrong answer here. However you want this to display is totally up to you. So I want salesperson in rows, and that'll give me a list of salespeople. Whatever you want to analyze, you put into values box. So I'll put sales in there, and that'll give me the sales figures for each of these people. Now, even at that stage there, if I double click on any of these figures, it will extract those figures for that person and drop it onto a separate sheet. As you can see down the bottom there, it's dropped it onto a separate sheet. I'll come back into this. That is a detached copy, by the way. You can just right click and delete that. You don't need that, but it is there if you, that feature's there if you so wish. I want to put a filter by location. So if I put location into the filter area, I have this little drop down filter at the top. Now, sometimes people try and add all the columns. So what if I put company in columns? So this is getting a bit big, and I don't like this. I don't want to be scrolling left and right, although there's not that many companies, but it's a lot of information. It's getting very similar looking to this. So trying to avoid that. So what I'm going to do is I'll pull that out by just dragging it out back to this. What you could do is just create a second pivot table. So you could copy this. If I copy this, now you can copy it with Control C and Control V to paste it, but you can also pick it up in Excel and use your Control key to copy like that. And I moved it. See the plus I've got there now, and I can just widen that out a bit to get rid of the hashes. So I've got a duplicate. So what I can do on this one, instead of looking at it by salesperson, I can pull that one out and maybe put company in there. So I'm now looking at the sales information by company, like so. So you've got, it's still looking at the same raw data, but I've got it by salesperson, I've got it by company. And if I copy that one again, so I've got three altogether, I'll just do one, three. Widen that. I could put date in there. So I'll pull out company and put date in there. Now I've already grouped the dates, so if I right click on these and ungroup them, ungroup, that's what that would normally look like. And then you come into this and you right click and group, and then you can select how you want it to be grouped. So if I go years and quarters and click OK to that, you can see how that's now sitting by year and quarter. So we've got three pivot tables all looking at raw data. If this raw data changes, what you have to do is refresh the pivot tables. You always have to refresh a pivot table using this tool. And you've got a drop down there which says refresh all. That one. But you've also got on the ribbon on this tab, insert slicer and insert timeline. So I'll go for a slicer. and I want it for location. I tick location, OK. So a slicer is just a posh name for a filter. I'll just move it over there. So this is exactly going to be the same as what I've got on the top here, but now I can see it easy. It's more visual. I select Keighley, I select Leeds, I select Liverpool, and you can see the filters are moving, but what is moving? So I'll just clear that one off and select Bradford. Only that one is changing up to Bradford. These two are not. So what you have to do is on the ribbon, you have a slicer tab. I'm on the slicer tab. Over on the left, you've got report connections. In there, you need to tick each pivot table report that you want this slicer to control. So now they're all saying Bradford, all three of them. So that's something you must do with a slicer if you've got more than one pivot table. It's also something you need to do if you insert, I'll go back into the pivot table, insert the timeline. So insert timeline, you've only got one date field, tick that on, and then you get your little timeline. I'll just put it down here out of the way. And again, if I click on that, this one is only affecting that. So I'll get rid of the filter. Same thing on the ribbon, report connections, and tick them all on so it's controlling all three. So if I now click that, all three are now reacting to that change. So that's basically how you can create your little pivot tables and not have too much information, have nice little small pivot tables. You can obviously format these if you so wish. You've got lots of options in the design area to change the color scheme on these if you want. I'm only going to do that one. But what else can you do with a pivot table? So if I just delete these off for a second, get some space, so I don't need them. And let's look at this one, the sales by person. I'm going to insert a couple of columns to just move that across a bit. If I bring down sales again in this one, what you can do is have a percentage total. So if I drag sales down again into there, so I've got it twice. It's come up with, I did salesperson there, not salesperson, pull out sales, the one below it. Comes up with the same figure. But if I click on that second one, sum of sales, go back into value field settings, I can select this option, show value as, it says no calculation, but if I drop this down, I can select percentage of column total, that one, and then just put a label at the top there, percent symbol, and click OK, and then that will add that in like so. And if you want, you can go to the data tab and just do a Z to A sort, so it gives you the highest first, like so, 22% for Janet Taylor. Now you can also do that. I'm going to do a different pivot table altogether. I'm just going to go back to raw data and do it here, so we've got some space. If I go insert pivot table, this worksheet, and I'll just get it to go there, OK, and I will bring in date. It's coming in like that, and then sales. So that's the actual sales. And I want to know what the percentage difference is between each of these years. So they can see that top one's 4 million, that's 1 million, so it's quite a drop off there, but then there's another increase on 2024. So you can select, go back into value field settings, and where it says show value as again, click into there, where it says no calculation, come down this list past the one we did before, a bit further down it's got percentage difference from, and then you can go previous, and then it's on years to date. But if you go back up and look at the other options in there, you've got quarter. You could do it by quarter, but I do want to do it by years. So if I leave that on there, previous year, and click OK. In fact, before I do that, I'll change the label. Percentage diff I'll put as a label, and then OK. And that's giving you the 73% drop off between these 2 years. And then you can see that there's a massive increase then in 2024. So that's percentage difference from. Now, if I go back to my other pivot tables, you can also do calculations in pivot tables. If I want to know what, say, 10% on top of this figure is, you can just click into the pivot table anywhere. On the pivot table analyze tab, and that might just be analyzed depending on what version you've got. You should have fields and item sets. In there you've got calculated field, and where it says field, I'm going to call this markup, and then I'm going to double click on sales and do times 1.1, add 10% on, and click OK, and then that'll just add 10% on. You can see that 2.2 million. Now you can change these labels. I can't put sales, but I can put sales with a space, because that's like a different word. You can't use the same words as what are in the columns. So if I put that as personnel, and then that can be just markup with a space after it. Space. Just do my little spell check, F7. I think there's only one L in personnel, so I'll get rid of one of them. Personnel. All of that's okay. And you can do that with all of these. You can just change them around. But that's a calculation. So if you change the source data and then refresh the pivot table, any changes will be reflected in this column as well, because you've got a calculation column within the pivot table. So we've looked at straightforward pivot tables. We've looked at percentage differences. We've looked at calculations and percentage of different totals. We've looked at creating 3 different pivot tables looking at the same data, which is what I recommend you do. What we haven't looked at is creating a pivot chart. So on Pivot Table Analyze, you have the pivot chart feature. So I'll click on that and just take a default column chart. And you can see it sitting there like so. Different companies. Don't need that label. I don't need that label. And if everything is getting in the way, which it is, you can just right click on that, move chart to a different sheet, to a new sheet. OK. Then it's got its own little sheet. Now it's got the filter up there on the top left for the location, only because that sits in there. If that was not in there, you would not get a filter on your chart. So I think even though people use slicers nowadays, still have that in there as well, which will give you the filter on the chart, because you do not have the little funnel symbol as you do on a normal chart on a pivot chart. It's not there, look. Normally on a normal chart there would be a little funnel there. I'll just show you that so you know what I'm talking about. So if I just go insert column chart on this, you immediately get, in fact that's still picking up a pivot table, so I'll just grab it on the raw data. So I'll just grab some of this and then do a chart, insert column chart. That'll do. You see you get the filter symbol there, but on a pivot chart you don't get that. So it's quite important, in my view anyhow, that if you're having a chart on a pivot table, you do need the filter putting on there, and that will only happen if you've got it in the filter area in the pivot table field list. But that's all I want to talk about in this little video: how you can create a pivot table, a basic pivot table, how you can have multiple pivot tables controlled by one slicer or one timeline, how you can do calculations in a pivot table, how you can do running totals in a pivot table, and how you can do percentage differences in a pivot table. So hopefully this little video is of use. Thank you for your time, and I will catch you on the next one.